Hello, my love. Welcome to another episode of Blisstopia podcast. I am your host, Mercedes Castellani, and I'm so excited to be recording this episode. I think this episode will really inspire you to follow your dreams, to be who you really want to be. And the guest that we have today is a beautiful embodiment of just that. Our guest today is Livia Marati. Livia is an entrepreneur, holistic health coach, yoga teacher, retreat host, and she's really passionate about helping people live with intention, discover their purpose, and activate their inner light. She's also the creator of Guam's first wellness festival. We're going to talk a lot about Guam today. You're going to find out where that is and where it's located, which is called the Ina Well Fest. And she's the host of the Illuminated Path Podcast. So welcome, Liv, to the show. I'm super happy to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. So grateful to be here with you and to get to connect today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Before we had this interview, I was of course checking, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, and I was really surprised about several things in your profile, in your life. First of all, when you told me you were located in Guam, I was really surprised. I didn't really know where that is. It's a beautiful island, but I had no clue where that is. So can you tell us more about Guam, where it is, how you ended up there? And I'm really curious to understand how life is on an island, on a beautiful island like Guam. So tell us more about where you live.
Yeah, no problem. I think a lot of people, they hear the word Guam and they're like, where is that? A lot of Googling, a lot of zooming in and zooming out. And, it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I would say the closest things to us, the closest places you can go from Guam would be Japan or the Philippines. Closest to Asia, we have a lot of Asian influence here, but Guam is also a US territory. So it is technically, a piece of the US. And so we also have the American influence here as well. Guam actually was originally occupied by the Spanish. So there's Spanish influence, Japanese influence, American influence. So it is really a melting pot on a small little island. And because it is so remote, it is very small community, very family oriented, beautiful beaches, lots of jungle, but it is in the middle of not much around. So we have to get super creative and resourceful. And I grew up here. So my family's from here. I'm half a Guamanian, or what we call Chamorro, and then my other half is Italian. So my dad's Italian, my mom's from Guam, and so I call Guam home. I, was raised here and I went to school here, and I returned back in 2020 after being away for almost 14, 15 years. And so now I'm getting to know Guam as an adult, and I'm getting to know this island and really appreciating island life, having lived in cities before. And it is a special place, and there's a lot of work to be done in the wellness space here. So it feels like I'm supposed to be here at this time in my life. So
I can imagine the energy, just having nature all over, the jungle, water, like it must be so rich, so alive, and just so in contact with life, which is something that sometimes when we're in a big city, we're far away from our true nature. And true nature is being around our own environment, our own nature, Mother Nature. So it must be so beautiful. Amazing. I know like all my Blisstopia community must be already like, oh my God, I need to be on an island. So basically, you are an embodiment of following your dream, being who you really want to be. Blisstopia is, to give you more context, is my vision for the world. And in this vision for the world, people are fulfilled, they're aligned with their purpose, and you are a beautiful embodiment of this. So how did you find your purpose in life? What was that journey like?
yeah, it definitely has evolved quite a bit, especially I would say in the last 5 years. My life has taken a big turn towards my purpose and towards really going all in on that. But my, initial introduction, or part of my path that really led me here, was, so after college I decided to move to California, to San Francisco. And so I lived in San Francisco for a good chunk of time, and that's really where my career started. I was in the events world. I worked at a tech company that specialized in events. And so I was there at that company for almost 8 years. And I really, credit a lot of what I've learned as an entrepreneur back to being part of a startup, being part of like the events industry. But one thing that really stuck out to me there that is a part of my path is realizing how much power a live event and a live experience can have, whether it's a
Mm.
festival, whether it's a, wellness event, whether it's, a food event, like people getting together for these live experiences really has the power to allow people to feel connected, and then to have this ripple effect out in the world where people come together for these events, they exchange, have some type of experience, and then that ripples out elsewhere. So being part in that world for almost 8 years was really like such a huge inspiration to me, because I was able to see like this is something that I want to create eventually, but first I have to be almost like the student. And so being around events, being around event creators, being around event attendees really led me to think about, as I got to the end of that 8 years there, of like, what do I want to do next? And I could have chosen to be, to go to another company that was similar, or to go to a bigger company. But I was actually really inspired in my time there to switch over to be on the event creator side. I was like, I actually want to create events. I don't want to just be part of like planning or be, behind the technology behind it. I actually want to be the creator. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and at the time I was actually living in Amsterdam, and I had met my husband there, my now husband there, and we were talking about, what's next for us, right? Like, where do we want to go next? And I would share with him the idea of like, always wanted to create something back home on Guam. I've always wanted to, do something in the wellness space, because that was always something that I was doing, alongside my job. Was like going to yoga classes, going to retreats, going to sound baths. And so I was like, how do I fuse this together, right? How do I fuse
Mm.
events and experiences with wellness and all of the modalities that go with that into something? And then how do I bring that back home and to a place where there's not much of that happening at all? And so my husband was like, yeah, let's move to Guam. What are we doing in the winter in Amsterdam? Like, let's go to Guam. And so that was really like an invitation to be like, okay, let's do this. So yeah, I moved home in beginning of 2020 to launch, Wellness Collective. And it really was inspired by like, how do I bring what I love and infuse that with my background and create something new and something that's impactful and meaningful to the place.
Amazing. And then I think you're touching on something super important here, because I think sometimes when people want to transition from, the corporate world into their dream, they have the feeling or the belief that they've wasted time. I was doing this for so many years and I've wasted so many years. But I think it's really nice what you're bringing up into the table, because it's like all of the things that I've learned about event creation are now actually helping me create events that have maybe a higher purpose, that are more aligned with my own purpose in life. And I think that's really interesting, because we never waste time. We're just learning things in one chapter of our lives that will then be useful in a second chapter of our lives. In my case, I was a marketing
Definitely.
director, so I learned a lot about, how to brand, how to allow people to dream through a brand, how to create a cohesive universe, how to sell, all of these things. And then now I can actually apply it, but to something that to me feels, bigger and more important than what I was doing before in the wine industry. So do you think there's some skills that you've learned in this previous life, let's call it that way, in this previous life back in these event companies? Are there any specific skills that you learned and that now you've been able to transfer into this new beautiful life that you have in WAM?
Definitely. The very first role I had at that company was in sales, and it was literally trying to, position the company and talk to people who I never talked to and sell what we were, offering. And I use that all the time now. You mentioned at the start of the introduction, creating a wellness festival here. And a big piece of that wellness festival is going out and getting sponsors and like making connections with vendors, and that whole relationship management that I learned through sales. And basically getting people to say yes to you is like a life skill, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of what I learned in that job of like cold calling, or, being able to follow up and move things forward, I take so much of that into entrepreneurial life now. And another piece that at that company that I really attribute to, something I've brought into my world now is towards the end of my time there, I was traveling all over. I was living in Amsterdam, but I was traveling all over. So we had offices everywhere. We had one in Madrid, we had one in Cork, Ireland, we had one in Brazil, we had one in Australia. So I was traveling all over the world. I was integrating these teams and meeting these teams across the world, and just being able to connect in such a with so many cultures and so many people. Like, it's really interesting because some of the people I've known from my past job, I'm now like connecting with them in a different way now, because some of them
Mm,
have left the job as well and now they're entrepreneurs. And I had one of them on my podcast lately talking about her coaching business. So it's like just how many people and connections I met through that job, and just immersing myself with different cultures, I feel like is such a skill that I bring into what I do now, especially with retreats and work in all over the world, so it definitely led me to this in such a big way.
amazing, beautiful. And I mean, you had these hobbies, you said you were doing yoga, you were doing sunbath, you were doing all of these things alongside your job. But how did you go from, okay, this was my hobby, into this is what I want to do for life? I want to become a wellness coach, a retreat host. What motivated you? How did you realize that was your thing in life?
I kept going back to that question, and it's something I actually ask a lot of my clients now too, is what is lighting you up, right? What's really bringing you joy, and lean into that. And I was noticing that the places and the spaces where I was really so lit up and so connected to myself, it was in those classes, workshops, retreats. I've had some of the most like profound, aha moments of what do I do next while on a retreat. I've
Mm,
experienced these huge like breakthroughs in the things that I now create, that I knew I had to lean into it. But of course, there's some imposter syndrome in the beginning, right? Of like, okay, well, this is what I want to do. How do I move from where I'm at my desk 9 to 5 into this world? It's a huge jump. And so one of
mm,
the ways that I approached it was really becoming the student. And one of the first things I signed up for was my holistic health coaching certification through IIN, or Institute of Integrative Nutrition. A lot of people have gone through that. And what I loved about that program is I could do it alongside my job. So I had my job, but then I was able to do it all virtually and kind of at my own pace. So I was able to do that before I moved back to Guam, and I was sort of starting to study and kind of get the foundational pieces of holistic health knowledge. And then before I moved back to Guam, I decided to do my yoga teacher training on my way home, because there's no yoga teacher trainings here on Guam. And so I spent about a month and a half in Bali on my way home, really immersing myself and integrating, that. And I'd been doing yoga for many, many years, but never on the, teacher side, only as the student. So I really decided, like, if I'm going to do this, I want to learn and I want to like
mm.
really soak it in, and I want to integrate it before I teach it. And yeah, so it was really like the little steps of like sign up for the program, sign up for this. But that has opened such a, as there are so many certifications, so many things you could learn. And I've done so many things since then that I've like added to my toolkit. But I think for me, I needed those two as like my foundation of like holistic health and yoga. Those were going to be my two sort of anchors. And from
Mm.
that, like so much expanded.
Amazing, so beautiful. And how did you go? I can imagine these two versions of you. The version that was in a beautiful company, because Eventbrite is an amazing company, who was sitting in this desk doing nice and fun things and just dreaming about this new life. And then there's the version that we see today, which is this aligned, beautiful, shiny version of yourself. You have a beautiful energy. So when you were on that desk, how did you transition from that life into the life that you have now? Were there any fears, challenges, and how did you move through those? Because I can imagine many of the listeners that we have today, they are probably going to the job. They're maybe on the metro right now, on the subway right now, or they are, getting out of their jobs, and they're dreaming about this new life. And sometimes it can feel really impossible. We're like, this is too good to be true. Who am I even to dream? Am I crazy to dream about all of these things? And I can also relate to those questions. How am I going to make it happen? Am I crazy? Is this even possible? Who made it before me? All of these question, limiting beliefs, fears, all of the things that now that we're on the other side, it's like, it's totally possible. You've got this. But how did you move through all of those steps? How did you overcome these fears, challenges? What was that transition like for you? And what do you think would help some of the listeners who want to do just that?
Yeah, I definitely, in the beginning, it's so easy. You're so right. It's so easy for all of those things to come up, all of those blocks. And one of the things that I found really helpful was allowing myself without the pressure, because I still had my jobs, I still had, my safety net for a little bit. But during that time that I had my job, I allowed myself to really dream of what, Wellness Collective would look like. Everything from like, what's the color palette to what's the mood board, and like what's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And I let myself really go there to like the specifics. It's so funny when I look back at some like those vision boards, but I'm like, yeah, those have happened. But I needed to kind of sit in the energy of not just I want to start a business and I want to, start teaching, but what is this going to look like and feel like? What's like the bigger vision? And that connecting to my intuition was a huge piece of that, because I was really feeling called to go home. But when I started to put down like, okay, maybe I could start with this and then maybe it expands to that, and just like letting myself get excited, that was such a huge piece of it, because I needed to go there and kind of see the big vision while still having like, okay, I'm still getting my paycheck here. I'm not like fully stepping off the ledge. But from there, it was like really breaking down, which is, essentially coaching, taking this big idea and being like, well, what it's like the tiny, tiny steps that I can take little by little towards it. But there are some steps that, even though they're really little, can feel really big. Like, I'm going to save the Instagram handle, right? I'm going to get the domain. I'm going to have someone
Yes.
make my logo. Like all those little steps, they might feel small, but they actually at that time feel so big. And so it was like really a mix of the dreaming, but then also like just little by little, like planting little seeds. So by the time I got to the point of announcing it, and one thing I did for my like announcement was I created a list of all the people I know, all the people who I think would care that I was making this big transition. I sent them an email of like, this is what's happening. I'm moving from Amsterdam. I'm moving back to Guam. I'm creating this. And really just saying like, hey, follow me on Instagram now. This is what I'm going to be doing. If you're interested, give me your email, build the email list. Like I just sent it to friends and family, right? Friends, family, people I know in the wellness world as like a, hey, this is what I'm doing. And even just that, like so many people responded back like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing this. And like oftentimes a lot of our like early clients or connections, like we already know them, like that we already have like our inner circle who could come to our first retreat or to our first event. And so I focus on kind of nurturing like, who are those people that have one degree of connection from me that already are part of this, this movement as I'm getting started.
Amazing, beautiful. And now that you're fully living this life, which are some of the, challenges of entrepreneurship that you're experiencing, and how do you, kind of coach yourself through those? Because, entrepreneurship can be a little bit of a roller coaster sometimes. And some days are just amazing. Some days you're like, oh my God, shall I just quit and get back into a corporate job? So it's not easy, it's not for everybody. So how do you coach yourself? How do you move through some of the things that are appearing right now? Because I don't want to paint either this picture that, okay, now that we're on the other side, everything is perfect and it's just so easy, because it's not. I mean, yes, you will be happy pretty much every day of your life because you are aligned. And even if challenges come up, you're like, there's a bigger purpose behind this. And I'm going to push through this. But it's not always easy. So how do you move when it's not always easy?
Yes, that's such a good, good reminder too, because sometimes you can't actually see the lesson until after it's happened. And what I didn't realize with becoming an entrepreneur is it does bring like all your stuff up to the surface, like anything, mindset, people pleasing, raising your prices, like all these things bring things up to the surface, which I didn't realize. I was like, no one told me that becoming an entrepreneur is like a therapy experience. And so for, I mentioned before, my big thing with moving back and starting, Wellness Collective was events, live experiences, getting people together, creating these transformational experiences. So my very first events were in February, and I launched with 3 events out of the gate. I'm like, I wasn't even home yet. And I was like, I'm having these 3 events in February. These are going to be the kickoffs to like all these events that we're going to do. And I did the 3 events, 1, 2, 3, February. And then a couple weeks later, we go into lockdown because we're now in COVID. And that was a huge, my first initiation into entrepreneurship was change of plans, right? It's like, so I initially thought we're going to phase 1 events, phase 2 retreats, phase 3 coaching. And because of that happening, I had to really quickly switch gears to we're starting with coaching. Like we're doing, and I
Mm,
graduated from my program right at March 2020. I was like, all right, we're starting with coaching. So it's forced me to really be adaptable, to be like, okay, if events are not going to happen for the first 2 years of my business, how can I build my community in the meantime? How can I grow my coaching business? How can I get super creative so that by the time events and retreats can actually happen, people are ready to go? And that's exactly what happened. I built sort of the community behind the scenes, built the online, presence, built the coaching so that people were like, when's your next retreat, or when's your first retreat? But it really took that being adaptable and being able to be resilient, also not
mm,
knowing, like, I just moved back to Guam, is this going to work? It was a big risk, but a piece of that was knowing that, like, there's no option of failing. I'm here. I literally moved my whole life here. This has
mm,
to work. Having a little bit of that, grit and risk, I think, is a big piece. But luckily, my sister and my brother-in-law are both entrepreneurs. And I remember them telling me, just plan for your first 3 years of business to be figuring it out. Plan accordingly, save accordingly. Like sometimes it doesn't just take off right away, right? You need to have that
mm,
like growing pains. And now when I look back, now I'm going into year 5, I agree that your first couple years, you're experimenting. You're like, does this work? Let's try this. Let's say yes to this. Let's do this. And you're kind of seeing like what sticks. And now
mm.
at this 5-year mark, I'm really in the place of like, okay, I said yes to a lot of stuff, but now I get to simplify. Now I get to be like, what do I want to do? Now I know like what works and what doesn't. And but those first couple of years is really being in experimentation mode and allowing it to not be like successful and perfect every time.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know many people will relate, and I think it also gives people this, okay, what can I expect? Because we don't want to paint this picture perfect of it's all rosy, it's all perfect. Yes, you're going to feel motivated every day of your life, but some days are going to be easier than others. And you need to be ready for that. And you need to be quite brave, to be honest, if you want to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, I don't think this ride is for everybody. I think you said something that it's important, and I do feel very related to that. This has to work. It's that kind of, I've taken this leap of faith. You've moved your family, to an island, or you quit your corporate job, and then it's this energy of this has to work, and I'm gonna figure out how I'm going to make it. I don't know. I might not know right now how this is going to work, but it has to work, and I'm gonna figure out how. And it takes
Yes.
that
And
level of
now,
grit.
yeah, definitely. Now that I've experienced the freedom of entrepreneurship and how I can, work from anywhere I want and take however much time I want off, and just now that I've gotten a taste of that flexibility and freedom, now I'm like, this has to work because I'm not going back to 9 to 5. Like I can't go back. So that's like an additional layer of like, yes, my, mission and movement is driving me, but it's also the freedom of being an entrepreneur that I'm like, I got to keep that. So that's an incentive as well.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Being able to, travel, spend time with your family, just take holidays whenever you want, move, a little bit more flexibly, especially as we have, you have a child, so that also helps, having more flexibility. So now I'm interested in your day-to-day life. I know you like to talk about, curating beautiful spaces and balancing different energies. So how do you intentionally design your environments, for example, in your retreats or in your home? Which are some of the pieces that you take into consideration to intentionally design different environments in your life right now in Guam?
Yeah, definitely. Environment is a huge piece of the programs I run and what I talk to my clients about, especially because most people I'm working with, there is some desire at some level to change their habits, change their lifestyle, and create a life of more intention. And so one thing I really love to look at, which I've done with, in my own life too, is looking at what I call these like keystone spaces. So these parts, these spaces in your home, or they can even be in your office or even in your car, right? These places that you frequent often that have a huge impact on your lifestyle. So for example, I always talk about like the kitchen being like a keystone space, because so much of our habits revolve around food, hydration, cooking, meal prepping, whatever it might be, that if your kitchen, for example, isn't set up or designed to support those habits that you're trying to do, it's going to be really, you're going to come up against a lot of resistance. So
Mm.
looking at the spaces in home, in office, in car, places that you frequent, and just asking yourself, like, is this space actually set up for me to thrive? And it sometimes can be a really simple tweak of like, okay, if I'm not trying to use my phone less and my phone charger is plugged in right by the side of my bed, that's supporting me looking at my phone right before bed, right? Versus like maybe I
Mm.
set up a separate designation for it of where it's going to be. That's supporting my habit for less screen time or whatever it might be. So I
Mm.
am always looking at that in my own home, especially because I work from home and I'm here at my house a lot. Of like, how can I intentionally design each space so that my office is my office and it's set up in the way that I need to thrive, and so on. So looking at those keystone spaces has been a big piece of the puzzle for me for intentional space design.
Amazing. And then as we think of, okay, we have this purpose in life, and then we create a whole lifestyle around it that can support those values, the intention that we have, our own identity. Spaces are a key part of that, but then also how we manage our own energy. So how do you manage your own energy throughout the day or throughout the week? Do you have any practices that allow you to be in contact with yourself and regulate maybe that energy up or down depending, what you need? Do you have any practices that you can share with us?
Yes. So, one of my core values is spaciousness. And that's like spaciousness in terms of space on my calendar, space in my home, space in like having a slow morning, right? So, because I know that's such a core piece of something I need to thrive, like I need space. That's a piece of why I love retreats so much, is because retreats give you that space, right? Like when you experience
Mm.
being at a retreat, it really gives you spaciousness to think. So, one of the things I do often, and granted my schedule changes every couple months or so depending on different things happening, but a big change that I made in becoming an entrepreneur was thinking about how can I design my week or my calendar in a way that I'm doing certain types of work on certain days. So for example,
Mm.
Mondays is kind of my like CEO day where I don't have any meetings. I'm purely just like in either admin or email, and I'm like that's really my focus. Then I have certain days where I'm coaching and I'm doing teaching yoga and I'm more sort of in that outward energy. And
Mhm.
I found that the days where I was like back to back to back, switching what I'm doing, like I'm taking a meeting, I'm taking an email, I'm taking, I'm doing a project, like that was so draining for me to just switch the type of work I was doing versus if I did, okay, today's my day that I'm coaching, calls, podcasts, like I'm outward, I'm able to prepare for that, right? And even today, like today, this afternoon, I had various calls. We have the podcast. I have a coaching call after
Mm.
this. And I'm able to be like, okay, I'm going to set myself up for this day. That this is like my focus today. And so I find that that is a huge way to balance my energy, is just like being more in control of my time and what kind of work I'm doing. And then a big piece has also been like setting some boundaries for myself around, as an entrepreneur, you are your own boss. So you get to decide when the computer goes away and when it doesn't. And so setting some boundaries around, not working on weekends, not taking calls before 10 a.m., 6 p.m. I'm like not in this room anymore. I'm like really, I create these boundaries at home with work. But I have to also, continually check in of like what is supporting me to do my best work, and it is spaciousness. It's like that's when my
Mm.
ideas come through. My ideas come through when I have space to think. And so knowing that that's actually equally important in my work is not just the doing but like the thinking, because then I'm going to have
Mm.
the new idea come through in that way.
Yes, amazing. And how do you balance, for example, because some of the things that you're covering, it's that masculine energy and feminine energy, the boundaries on one side and the structure. So it's more of the masculine, but then you're saying spaciousness, and that's what the feminine energy and creativity will need. So how do you balance those two energies, moving to the goals that you want. This has to work. It's a very masculine, approach. But at the same time, with this feminine flow, how do you balance these two energies in yourself, in your life, in your business?
Definitely. One like kind of click that happened for me, in this past, 5 years, was really realizing that a lot of people are nailing the masculine side by default. The way our society is, structured, right? Is that we're doing go, 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 schedule, get it done, action, you know, ROI, whatever it is. Like most of us are living in that already. So it actually does take more thought and intention to create that feminine flow. And I find that with a lot of my clients, so like they're killing it at the masculine side. Like they are doing all the things. And so it's making that intentional feminine flow time. And for me, I've found, one of the ways I've structured my business, and that's something I've noticed, is that like applying that same masculine structure in order to have the feminine flow, right? To have blank spaces on your calendar, to have time off. But one way that I've structured my events here on Guam is that I always do events around the moon. So I do full moon events, I do new moon events, and all my retreats are around the changes of the season. So we just did our autumn awakening retreat, for example. So I have found that looking at those like natural touch points that are like natural times to reflect, to pause, what's happening here, what's happening in nature, has been super supportive for me to just kind of get that space. And so I've built it into my business that I have to think about like what's happening with the moon this month, or the eclipse. And like I'm building that time in for myself to reflect, and for other people to do the same. And thinking about just those natural cycles has really connected me to my feminine, of like, okay, it's autumn, like, or it's fall, like let's, even though we don't have those seasons on Guam, like how can we still feel like that energetic shift and like change of the season, to slow down.
Yes, which is something that we forget when we're in big cities. It's just like go, go,
Sure.
go, push, 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 and we're just not in contact with the moon, not in contact with anything really. So, what are your non-negotiables now? Now that you've tested this life, you've built this life for yourself. Which are your non-negotiables in terms of lifestyle, that you're like, I am never letting go of this because this really makes me happier?
Yes, for me, that has definitely been movement of all kinds, of any type, but it's changed throughout the seasons for me, like even just my own like seasons of life. There are times when I've been really into more intense movement, whether that's like cycling or weightlifting, but there's also been times I've been really craving just like a walk or a swim, or like restorative yoga. But what I know is that when I become stagnant and when I don't move, there is just like this ripple effect that comes from that. And it could be said for food as well, right? Food and movement together kind of are the duo. But I've found that like I see the changes really start to go the opposite way when I'm not like moving my body in some way. And I'm really lucky that, I teach yoga. So I'm always teaching, a couple times a week I'm moving my body, but I try to be more intentional about what I'm like craving to do, of like what do I really feel like doing, what's bringing me joy. So lately I've really been loving just like cycling, and so we have a cycling studio here that's like, dark, loud music, the lights are off. So I've been really
Yes.
loving that, right? I'm like 45 minutes and that's all I'm thinking about is like choreography on the bike. So that to me has been like super fun, and definitely a non-negotiable to move in some way.
Amazing. I just tried that. Now I came back from a trip to Guatemala and I was visiting a friend, and she loves to do like these very intense classes. I love intensity as well. And we tried one of these classes with the bike. It was all dark. It was so much fun. We were like kind of doing choreographies and dancing on the bike. It was so good. I felt like I was in a festival for
Yeah.
45 minutes. It was so good.
It's the closest thing I'm getting to a festival here on Guam. So I'm like, I'll take it.
Amazing. So, what would you recommend to a woman who has a wild dream like yours? Maybe she's like, in her vision, she's visualizing and she thinks, I'm going to be on an island and I'm going to maybe organize retreats and do these kind of events. And it feels so far away when you're, maybe in a big city in Europe, and you're just, I'm going to move to an island in the Pacific and I'm going to do all of this. What would you recommend to her, knowing what you know now, what would you say to that woman who has this amazing, beautiful dream in her heart to move forward to that dream?
Yeah, I've even been thinking about this more lately too, is if it's something that you visualize and you see and you know, it's like that inner knowing, it already exists somewhere in your, in your reality. The fact that you can see it or you can feel it or you feel the pull, even if you can't explain it. Like I've told so many people, like they're like, "Oh, why'd you move back to Guam?" Like I just felt like I need to be here, like I felt the call to come home, and it is like a calling. Nowadays, I'm, feeling super connected to my intuition, that if I see something or I have an idea for an event, I kind of just let myself go there. I'm like, okay, I have this. I'm visualizing for my festival next year, right? Wellfest. I'm like, I can already see the backdrop. I can already see the color scheme. I just kind of let myself go there, like kind of future trip into like, what is it going to look like? And just allowing yourself to know that, like, see the details unfold means it already exists, right? It's just now a matter of you bringing it into reality, of like taking the aligned action, right? And like actually manifesting it into reality. The other thing is like one, huge thing I've done over my life in different parts is constantly look for, those expanders, those people that like, okay, they're a few steps ahead of me and they just show me that it's possible. And so when I was not a health coach yet, when I wasn't a yoga teacher yet, when I wasn't a retreat host yet, even before I started my podcast, I just reached out to different people and asked them, about their story, or asked them about how they started, or if they had any tips, things they would, do differently. And just seeing that like it's possible, and like with that mindset of like, if it's possible for them, it's possible for me too. And just kind of have that expansion moment. That was like definitely like a big piece of the next step. But I'm a firm believer that like following the breadcrumbs of the universe, right? Of like, okay, like there's a sign there, there's a sign there. Take the trip, say yes to that connection, like that it's all leading you there somewhere. And I would say now that I look back on my life, I'm like, it was all leading me here. I've got to trust that whatever I'm like feeling called to do next, like it's leading me towards like a bigger path, even if it doesn't make sense in the moment.
Yes. And connecting back to what you said kind of in the beginning of the episode, you said we need to follow that joy. We need to follow that joy. We need to follow curiosity. We need to follow the excitement. We need to follow the intuition. And then eventually you're gonna, look back and it was all leading you somewhere. And I can totally relate to that. When I was, in my corporate job as a marketing director, I was always, interested in meditation and yoga and spirituality and doing all sorts of modalities and things. I never thought that this would then become, my business and my professional life. I had no clue. I was just like genuinely interested in all of these things. And I would just, anytime I had some free time, that's what I wanted to do, like naturally. And then it turned out you could actually create a business out of that. And you could actually create a life out of that. And I remember when I was in, my corporate job and trying to decide, okay, shall I do this? Not. I also felt like this strong intuition, just like go, this calling, as you described it, like go, do it. It's this thing. In the beginning, it was kind of subtle, and then towards the end, it was very loud. And I think the more we become in tune with our intuition, the easiest we can feel this pulse, like go, like it's the right, go towards the right. It's that thing, and it becomes very clear. So we want to definitely strengthen that muscle and develop intuition. So thank you so much for all of this wisdom. Thank you so much for your beautiful energy. It's been a true pleasure to have you today. So where can listeners find you online? Where's the best place to hang out and know more about you and your world and your amazing retreats in Guam?
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram. It's Ina Wellness Collective. So Ina Wellness Collective on Instagram. That's where I hang out the most. I manage it. So if you drop into the DMs, that will be me. And yeah, I have, coaching programs, retreats coming up this year or next year. And Bali and the Philippines and here on Guam. And yeah, and the podcast as well. So a range of offerings, all in the holistic health.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I love finishing each of the episodes with some rapid fire questions. So are you ready?
Yes.
Good. So when was the last time you felt bliss?
Probably in July at my most recent retreat in Bali. I had my birthday there. So I turned 36, and it was just such a full circle moment to have like gone to do my yoga teacher training there and return back with like 18 women hosting a retreat with my kid, with my husband. It was like definitely one of those pinch me full circle moments. I was like, it happened, right? It's off the vision board. It's now in reality. So that was such a moment of bliss for sure. And Bali is just magical.
Yeah, so beautiful. I'm getting like full body goosebumps. So beautiful. Can you think of one idea that fundamentally changed your life?
Yeah. I think a big thing that's changed my life recently is just letting go of people pleasing, letting go of having to say yes to everything, letting go of having to make sense to everybody, and just really letting that go and like listening. Again, it goes back to intuition, right? Of like, I inherently know the best things for me. And so tuning back into that and letting go of like the need to please has been a huge piece for me.
Amazing. And then the last one, if you could choose one rule that everyone in the world needs to obey, what would it be?
That's a hard one. The first one that came to mind is just like, give a stranger a smile, right? Like so often in like cities too, right? Everyone's walking around with their phone, down on their phone, just like in their own world. And like there's so much that can happen when someone makes eye contact and smiles, and just like that energy exchange, and it has such a ripple effect everywhere. So probably just walking around making eye contact and smiling, people would be, I think, a lot happier where they are.
I love it. It would be a much nicer society, right?
It would.
I love it. Amazing. Thank you so much, Liv, for being on the podcast today. It was a true pleasure to discuss with you, to learn from you, from your experience, from living this amazing life in Guam, in this amazing island, aligned with your purpose. Thank you so much for your wisdom today.
Thank you so much. So great to connect with you.
It was so beautiful to have Liv on the show. Her energy is amazing. Her life is so beautiful in Guam, organizing retreats, organizing events in an amazing island in the Pacific. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh my God, I really want to do that as well. I want to find what my purpose is in life, and I want to then transform my life. I want to actually live that purpose. Then it sounds like you would really, really love my Path to Purpose program. So in this program, we're going to be working together for 4 months. The first month, we're going to dive. We're going to go into self-discovery, self-awareness, so that you can really get to know yourself. The second month, we're going to dream. So you're going to allow yourself to dream big. What do you want to do in life? Do you want to be on an island? Do you want to be in a big city? What do you want to actually this amazing life to look like? On the third month, we're going to design. So, okay, once you choose one idea and this idea feels super compelling and your intuition is saying, yes, let's do it, then how does this actually look like in terms of lifestyle, in terms of location, in terms of work-life balance? How does this actually look like? And then on the fourth month, we're going to do. So how do you move in a very concrete manner in terms of action? How do you move to the place where you are right now in your life to the place where you want to be? So 4 months, dive, dream, design, and do. So if this sounds like something you want to do, something you want to apply in your life and transform your life forever, you will find the link in the show notes. You can join the Path to Purpose program. I would love to have you in there. The more women we have in this world who are aligned with their purpose, who are truly, truly happy and fulfilled, the better this world will be. I am convinced of that. So join Path to Purpose. You will find the link in the show notes. I will see you on the next episode. And in the meantime, in Blisstopia we trust.